Hi there, welcome to Hey Sound Guy, the podcast where I'll be peeking behind the curtains of the wonderful world of music. Each week I'll be speaking to sound engineers, music industry professionals, and musicians, and we'll get to know them a little bit better and share some fun stories from the road. My next guest is a brilliant saxophone player from Australia. As you'll hear from him, he's moved around a little bit. He started his career in primary school. He started playing in primary school, and he's been classically trained and trained in the jazz world. Really, really good, very talented musician, great friend. Was a fantastic chat. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my good friend, Graeme Blevins.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for doing this, man. This is great. You're looking very smart today, as I just said. I hope you didn't get shaved just for this.
I have a bit of a grooming pattern at the moment, which usually revolves around doing videos for people's online collaborations. Mm-hmm. So I usually get a bit of growth, and then when it's video time, I'll shave. Embarrassingly, this is 1 day growth though.
Okay, well that's not too bad. Yeah, me too. I shaved yesterday.
Yeah, that's a pretty serious 1 day growth you got going there.
Yeah, monkey see, monkey do. So how I start normally is if you could tell us who you are and what it is you do and how you got to do what it is that you do.
Okay, my name is Graeme Blevins. I'm a saxophonist, woodwind performer, improvising musician, and how I got to do what I do, I'd say is like a story similar to many people. Worked up through, primary school music, high school music. Became pretty clear from a very early age that was the only thing I could do / wanted to do. I was pretty singularly focused on that my whole life, and just was very passionate about practicing as hard as I could and getting as good as I could on the saxophone and in improvisation and classical performance and everything. And that ultimately led, the short version of the story, that ultimately led me to what I believe to be, the one of the best and definitely my favorite places for music in the world, which is London.
Yeah, right. So how old were you when you started blowing for a living?
Nicely phrased question. If I'm interpreting that the way you mean it to be, I had one other non-musical job in my life, which was washing dishes at my friend Blake's cafe, and it was called Blake's, and his family owned it, and I still got fired after 3 days because I wasn't very good at washing dishes. I wasn't fast enough. But apart from that, I just started doing gigs when I was 16, 17, and that's all I've really done.
Fantastic, man. How old were you when you started playing? What was the sort of the thought behind it? I mean, obviously, as you said, it's been a passion, ever since you started doing it. So once the bug bit you, that was it. You were involved.
Yeah.
How old were you when you started music? Was this primary school? Was this?
Yeah, I got my first musical introduction from my grandmother when she came over from Scotland to the middle of the desert in country Western Australia to visit, and she taught me some piano. So I was 5 years old then, and she taught me some basics on the piano, and we always had a piano in the house after that. From there I had a bit of a we moved around a lot when we were kids.
Mm-hmm.
Or when I was a kid, my parents were, for work reasons, they so moved around to different country towns, and so I started learning whatever instrument was in the town, which includes clarinet, trumpet for a while, until I moved to Perth to start high school.
Right.
When I got a joint scholarship on singing and saxophone at 12 years old. So really, the decision for me to play saxophone was made by somebody else.
Right.
It was down on the list of instruments I liked, but trumpet was what I wanted to do.
Okay.
When I was 12,
okay.
And so from there I started learning and sort of wasn't really in love with it until about when I was 14. I ended up getting lessons off a saxophone player who just moved over from France to Perth, Western Australia, called Serge Le Gueuf, which is now one of my closest friends. And his contagious enthusiasm for the music and for jazz improvisation really just introduced me to what it was all about, to all the, Cannonball, Charlie Parker, Michael Brecker, all those sort of things that, really sort of lit the fire when I was about 14. That's when it really things changed.
Okay, great. But I mean, that's fantastic. So you said your nan came over from Scotland. So I take it you're second generation Australian. Did your parents move over to Australia like before you were born? Well, you were born in Australia, weren't you?
I was born in Australia. They moved over about 3 years before I was born. So yeah, they're definitely still got thick Scottish accents.
Oh, right.
It's where I get my pale blue skin from.
That's not from playing in dark jazz clubs all the time.
Well, I suppose a little from column A, a little from column B, but
yeah, you were made that way. It's brilliant.
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, at least you stand out in the dark, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, totally.
That's great, man. So you had you started on the piano and then trumpet. I suppose that's a good choice for a 12-year-old wanting to make as much noise as they can.
Yeah.
I mean, I got to be honest with you. I think it's probably one of my least favorite instruments, the trumpet. I mean, not saying that I don't like it, but if I compare it to a trombone and a saxophone and clarinet and all these things, they're just so beautiful and sensual. And then you get this, it's like I don't know, it's like a freaking foghorn, it's just like, Wah! And, but yeah, I suppose it also depends on the person playing it, because being
Definitely.
what it is, I've heard it played so beautifully and sensually. It's everybody's just got their thing. Like, I don't like the snare drum. I like drums, but I don't like the snare drum.
Yeah, but also interestingly, these are the two things which are difficult to mix in a live setting when it's a club about 300 seater.
Yeah,
because the trumpet and the snare drum will overpower the rest of the mix. So maybe you're being clouded by your experiences. Maybe you actually love the snare drum.
Yeah, that's probably what it is. It just, had so much snare that I'm like, okay, we're gonna have to part. We're divorced.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean that. Well, I suppose the only way that we really get to be able to mix a trumpet in a venue, as you said, of smaller sizes, is to put those little reflector shields around the microphones. They work wonders.
Yeah.
It's twofold, because the trumpeter doesn't need as much of himself in the monitor, and also
That's a big
the first row and second row up to the 10th row doesn't leave with melted eardrums. Is often the case, where it's such a loud instrument. And I mean, you have to play it loudly. It's you can't play it quietly, but the majority of the time there's a lot of puff involved in making that pipe squeal.
There is, yeah. I think, but obviously some people play it beautifully, like in soft, and Chet Baker, kind of Miles Davis, but the trumpet does that. I think Wynton Marsalis said once that something, I'm paraphrasing, but something about, the trumpet is the only instrument that sort of does what it says. It trumpets. It trumpets something, and that's part of its sort of it's part of its sort of appeal. It is really,
it
heralds news.
It's like just holding on for dear life to this thing and let it do what it does. Like Arturo Sandoval, he loves saying, it's like, yeah, man, you don't play the trumpet. The trumpet plays you.
Oh, that sounds painful.
Yeah, I mean, what are you going to do? So then you went and you got a scholarship for vocals and saxophone. That's fantastic, man. Wow. Do you still sing?
No, I don't. But at that stage, I was really into it. Like the teaching method they used at the school, Perth Modern School, that I went to, had an incredible teaching staff. They're just really, really incredible. They used the Kadai method of solfege. So it was the singing was very intertwined with the sort of classroom education, and that sort of influenced my my saxophone learning as well.
Okay. Can you elaborate a little bit on the Kadaj method? What is that?
I think I'm pronouncing it right. I think it said Kodai. I think it's Hungarian. Kodally is how
Okay.
it's written, but I think it's commonly referred to as Kodai.
Okay.
It was a teaching method that they used there, and they used it around the world. But for me, what it involved was the solfege, just like normal do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, but with the chromaticism, and without going overcomplicated on it, was a fixed do. So in the key of C major, C would be do, so D would be re, E would be mi. But similarly, in the key of G major, G would be do. So that makes it a movable do, not fixed do.
Okay.
So in every major scale, I'd do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. But also the chromaticism that came from it was, as you raise, if I remember this correctly, as you raise the note chromatically, it becomes a D. So do, di, re, mi, fa, fi, so, si, la, li, ti, do would be the chromatic scale ascending.
Okay.
And the chromatic scale descending would be do, ti, to, la, lo, so, fa, mi, mo, re, ro, do. So attach that syllable to it.
Okay.
And I know I've spoken to some people about their version, and they have different syllables attached to that. But how that affected me in a very positive way was that even when I was 13, 14, learning this method, when I was sort of hearing things, and without being able to play them yet on my instrument, I could internalize them with the solfege and understand them theoretically, and then put them onto the instrument sort of subsequently. And it was real sort of like sort of a great middle ground for my head and my ear to get around all the information I needed to eventually do the things I wanted with improvised music.
That's fantastic. That's great.
Yeah, it's a method I can't recommend highly enough to anybody who's I suppose of all ages, but as as far as ear training, I very very highly recommend it.
That sounds very interesting. I think for me, as I play the guitar, obviously I'm not an accomplished guitarist by any means, or I wouldn't consider myself a guitarist. I play the guitar and I've played it for a while. But I think the thing that, because I was sort of self-taught, I learned from watching my friends play and then going home and then beating out some chords on an old acoustic guitar that I had at home. And I was always into writing music and, writing my own little riffs and things like that. And I did a lot of that. And as I started progressing and started, communicating with people who have a higher understanding of it than myself, and I started learning a bit more and I started getting into theory, that was one of the things that I've always sort of felt, I don't know if it hindered me, if it sort of like stopped me, because then my head, I just kept trying to think, oh, is this right? Rather than, just navigating my way around, making something sound good. And then I was thinking about, oh, which scale is this in? And then I'd noticed so many times that I would stop playing completely because I'm sitting there thinking, what is it that I'm doing? Or is this the right way? So I think a method like that, where you've got, like you said, a movable do, something like that, where you assimilate the information in a better way, a different way. Yeah. It might have helped me,
totally,
to not kind of put me off as much. I mean, I kept going for a while, and I kept, I learned the theory and the stuff behind it, and but yeah, I mean, nowadays I don't play as much as I should or want to, as I've got a bunch of other things going on as well.
Yeah, but that's true. That familiarization, like when you first start to play an instrument for the first couple of years, it's A major scale can be really hard. It's got 3 sharps at some stage of your career, at some stage of your learning. That's hard. But with the movable do, it did make things. If I heard something on the radio, I heard something on a movie, I remember things happening, and it sort of blocks started to fall down in my head. That's obviously this interval, because I can tell it's do to mi or mi to la or something like that. Yeah, definitely helps.
So it's more relevant pitch than relative pitch rather than perfect pitch.
Definitely.
because
Yeah,
I think perfect
yeah,
pitch could be a burden.
yeah. There's a I can't remember. There's a I think it's Sam Leake doing a PhD on uh, whether you can teach perfect pitch. Is it Sam Leake? I get that confused. Anyway, someone's doing a PhD on whether you can teach perfect pitch, but man, it's I'd say it'd be somewhat of a burden.
Yeah, I think it'll be. You're going to have to put in the time. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I know. Miles Ashton. He says that he had perfect pitch and he learned to ignore it. Knowing Miles, he's intelligent enough to fuck his brain into not thinking something's wrong. He's sort of on another level when it comes to intelligence, as to the rest of us lowly people. But yeah, I mean that I can only imagine that's probably, it could be painful, especially for us as sound engineers.
Oh man,
Because people aren't always going to be in pitch, and it could be a hindrance, for us to do our job, because you're going to be so focused and distracted by the people playing the wrong notes. You'll get.
What about that? Sorry to interrupt, but what about that thing? Or I don't know how you guys do it sometimes with the identifying the frequency by the pitch, by the
That really is just training, ear training. I mean, the same way that you guys hear a scale, right? You can, like you said, you listen to the radio or you see something on TV, and you can hear the intervals, and you can hear, you can hear scales after a while. You can identify a chord or what, or you just go and sit and listen to a piece of music, and you do the transcription like that. I know you guys are fantastic at doing that. I would be nowhere with that. But how the sort of recommended way of starting down the road of frequency identification, if you will, is you've got three marks. You got your A, 440. I mean, I believe in 432 as true A, 432 hertz, but that's another discussion.
That's another podcast.
International recognized standard A is 440 hertz, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's stick with that. Then you've got 1K, which is like TV test tone, and then you got 10K. So you'll start off with listening to a sound and just identifying whether it's lower than A, whether it's between A and 1K, and whether it's between 1K and 10K, and then above that. So then you can start doing that. And then as you get better at it, you'll start introducing more intervals, if you will. You can then say, okay, I've got 440. Let's see what 630 sounds like, what 315 sounds like, 1K 2.5, 1.6K, 2.5K, 3.1. So you put in more sort of like marks in between, and then identifying frequencies in between those ranges, or trying to identify the frequency straight away. So it's really just a thing of putting in the time and listening to it. There's that, and there's a whole bunch of ear training apps that you can get to identify frequencies and stuff like that. But the normal beginning, the normal starting position would be put those three benchmarks in: 440, 1K, and 10K. And then as you go through the years, you just have to start identifying them, and just start every time. I mean, I'm a big believer in when you learn something new, or when you're trying to cement something down, to try and use as many of your senses as possible, right? So you hear something, but then also saying it, it just brings it in. So if you hear a frequency and you're like, oh, that's 630, and then you look and yes, it was 630, then you're like, okay, I've got a visual representation, because I've got an SPL meter, not an SPL, a frequency response meter, so you can see if you were right or wrong. And then you just sort of put the information into your head accordingly. And the more senses that you can incorporate, the better. Like, I mean, I always tell my daughter, if you read a book, don't just read it out loud. Okay. Because then you're speaking it, you're hearing it, you're seeing it. And then as you're hearing it for yourself, your brain goes into almost a heightened state of imagination than rather just reading it silently on your own. So it really just comes from spending time and doing as much of it as you can. But if you're a working engineer, then you're gonna have those times that you're gonna have the time. You've put in the time. If you're working 4 days a week, it's a thing that you have to do over and over and over and over.
I bet.
Yeah. And also, I mean, what you can, that's one way. The other way, we always talk about tuning a room. I don't know, you're an engineer as well, so it's not like you don't understand these concepts about tuning a room, to either your voice. If you have a microphone that like an SM58 or something that's yours, because even two SM58s, as much as they try and make them sound the same, they don't always necessarily sound the same. They're in a close proximity to each other, because obviously these things get pumped out, by a machine. Not so much human error involved in these things, but
especially with those 58s, once they've been used, I bet at various establishments, if you took 10 57s and measured them,
they get dropped, they get wet, they get all sorts of things happen with these things. But if you like, I mean, I've got a 57 that I carry around in my bag. I've always got it with me. I know what it sounds like, because wherever I go, I plug it in through the system and then I talk into it. At Ronnie's, we've also got a 58, which is on the desk, the one that we use to make the announcement and stuff. So I know what that one sounds like, and that one doesn't change either. So it's always the same microphone.
Oh wow!
So we can tailor or tune the room, if you will, to our voice, or you can use a CD or a song that really well. How it should sound on headphones, how it should sound in a tuned studio, how it sounds in your car stereo, whatever you want to do. The song backwards, inside out, so you can then put it on there, and then you can see which of the frequencies aren't, which ones are too prominent and which ones aren't there. I mean, normally you won't boost the frequency to tune a room. That's a bit of a no-no because it just opens up a world of pain if you go and do that. But there's that way of doing it as well. But I find it much easier, more reliable to use my voice, because it's been in my head since I was born.
Yep. And so when you do, because I've seen people do that, but I suppose I'm sort of like a part-time engineer, producer, musician. I'm not like a fully fledged, proper engineer, as I say. But I've seen some friends of mine have like Gavin Tempany, this engineer, studio partner of mine. He clicks his tongue like, and from that it's like a bat. You can tell, it's quite funny when he walks into a room and does it. It is a bit like, being with a man-sized bat. But
what he does there is the same as you'll sometimes see engineers walk into the room and go like that. Yeah. Right? You're checking the reflections, the reverb time, how dry the room is, how it absorbs sounds and stuff like that. That's what he would be doing there, because that would obviously change the way in which you have to tune the room, in which you have to EQ instruments and stuff like that. If you hear the reflections coming back and there's more high frequencies bouncing back than lower frequencies, obviously you're going to cut some more of the high frequencies off, stuff like that, just to make something sit and be at a point where you're comfortable enough to boost the solo or something like that. So that's probably what he's doing with that.
speaking of boosting, I think someone's started to do some drilling in the next door yard. Do you want me to shut that window? Can you hear that?
I've heard that. Yeah. Well, if you shut the window, if that's going to help, that would be great. But I mean,
just give me one sec. I think it might get a little hot in here, but we'll see.
Right.
I think that's a really interesting factor in one. Me being not a proper engineer, but somebody I've got years of experience. But when I say proper engineer, it's more of a tip of the cap to actually people who they know what they're doing. You know, I know I've done it for many, many years, probably about 15 years now, maybe, gosh, a long time. But my knowledge also, you know, I've got to make sure that I play the saxophone, I play the flute, I play the clarinet, and I sort of try to keep it in my head that my knowledge ends here, my sound ends here. The rest of it is the sound engineer's job, and that's where their expertise comes in. And that room thing reminds me of an experience I had. I went to this. Can't remember the name of the studio, but it's in the south of France. It's incredible, beautiful studio. They do lots of jazz there, a bunch of ECM, and it was with the Kyle Eastwood quintet. We did one of their albums there. Right. And they put we got into this room and they put a 50 it was a C12 on the trumpet and a U87 on me, and I've never liked the U87 on the tenor saxophone, and I've never liked the C12 on the trumpet. And I was like, you know, I didn't say anything. I'm not going to say anything. This is just, you know, I'll see how it sounds first, and you know, this is obviously not, you know, this is not what I'd normally do. But
it's very mature of you.
Well, you know, it's I think it's also, it disrupts the creative flow if people are getting too involved. You know, I've definitely been guilty of it in the past, but I try my hardest not to. But the engineers, of course, they knew the room. The room was sucking up a lot of the top frequencies, as far as I'm aware. You know, and the trumpet sounded brilliant. You know, as in warm and gorgeous in the room. But it did need a bit of help to pick up those top frequencies, which the C12 provided. It was, you know, it was a bit of a lesson in there. It's for me, mic, you know, room tuning, mic selection, and for me as a saxophone player, reed selection, or for all woodwind players, you know, the reverberation of the room, the frequencies of the room definitely dictate what reed I'm going to play.
Right.
If it's you know, if it's a really if it's a really dry room, and I've got a thick reed with a bit like a darkness, not much brightness, and the sound will get lost. There'll be no projection. You know, all these sort of considerations.
Right.
You know?
Wow, that's something that I've never considered. Can you talk me a little bit through maybe sort of the reeds that you use and the you know, the difference that they, like you said, I'm just ignorant. I never thought that. I don't know why, because thinking of it now, you know, different players on the guitar would have different types of strings on it. You know, and that makes a difference. So what are the sort of reeds, sort of like a outdoor, let's say you're playing an outdoor festival versus Ronnie Scott's. What would be the difference in reed selection, and how would you go about making your choice?
It will be different for everybody. So I wouldn't say these are rules, but what I do find is,
you know, so
but like and sometimes there's general guides, but the best thing for all woodwind players to do is, as everybody knows, is to keep a few reeds of different strengths. So when we start talking about inside and outside, then humidity and temperature start affecting things a lot more, which is another sort of thing apart from acoustics. So if I leave that alone, because that's something which, especially coming from Western Australia, where, you know,
dry.
Sometimes the you know, you're doing an outdoor gig in, you know, 45-degree heat. It has a particular toll on your reeds, but if you just go to acoustics, so like somewhere like Ronnie Scott's, I'd need something that was it's quite I love the acoustics at Ronnie Scott's. I think it's my favorite place to hear. If there's a band I really want to hear, it's my favorite. Ronnie Scott's would be my favorite place. Everything's really dry. Everything's really tight, I find, as a listener and as a player on stage. So, the help that you engineers give it, you can really present it in the way it needs to be
It is
presented.
beautiful, isn't it? Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like an empty canvas
Yeah.
that we can really just go to work on it.
Yeah.
It's a privilege, really.
I bet. But so in a room like that, I'd need to have something which is like you know on the lighter side, and a little bit more edge, so that it gave something in the room. Or just I suppose, not taking into account what happened post microphone, but as the sort of frequency happened in the room for my ears, I'd need to have it just a little bit brighter than dead center. And that's the sort of variation as the frequency of the room opens up, as the high frequencies, or the
Right.
playing in somewhere like a church.
Okay.
You can if you play with a really thin sound, you'll like a thin reed, and which is very bright, then you'll amplify those high frequency reverberations. Or if you play somewhere like a recording studio, for example, can be, depending on the recording situation. It can be it can be like the best place to record the sound is not always the most fun place to play, if you know what I mean.
100%. Yeah.
Ideally, as a player, you like to have a little bit of stuff coming back, and that's also great for the microphone. But basically, what I'm saying is, I always just make sure I've got a couple of reeds, because whatever place I'm playing, I might think, Ronnie's still, oh, this would be a great reed, and I get it out onto the stage, and I'm like, it's not bad, but make sure you've got like a thinner and a brighter and a darker reed, just to contradict that if needed.
So you would say, if you the better space you have in terms of acoustic, you would use a thinner reed, because you want to amplify some of the higher tones, and as it opens up and it's more of a lively kind of room, you'd get a thicker sort of reed to darken it up a bit. Is that kind of the gist?
Yeah, I'd go. That's how my ears definitely treat those situations. But it's definitely not saying
in the right way.
It's definitely not saying that one's a good and one's a bad acoustic situation, because one's great for one thing, one's better for the other.
100%. But I mean, just like a general rule of thumb, you're just like, okay.
Yeah.
So generally, if I play in a smaller, more sort of dead acoustic space, I'm gonna get a lighter reed, because it's gonna help project my instrument a bit more.
Yeah.
Whereas I've got a really lively situation, a live room, like you said, a church or a concert hall or something like that, where it's a big space and the sound travels really quickly. So I'm going to get a thicker reed to kind of darken it up a bit, and maybe prohibit those really highs from being too prominent.
Yeah.
Right.
That's definitely the thickness of the reed is a different thing, because that's more of the sort of details of woodwind performance, and don't want to unpack that today. But the brighter and the darker the reed, you definitely choose. I choose it along those sort of lines that you just said. Also, this is different for everybody, and everyone's got their own aesthetic choices. But this is reeds and reed selection is a big part of
it sounds like you can almost do a PhD on that alone. It's quite an interesting thing. And like I said, it's weird, because I see you guys change reeds, and I see you carry like a pack of reeds with you all the time. And obviously these things perish after playing with it for a while. But it's not something that I ever really even considered, that this is something that could make a difference to your to your sound, that you get thicker and thinner reeds. And I just thought it's a reed, you stick it in there. You guys carry spares, because they tear apart after a while. You lick it enough, it's going to fall apart.
Kind of, yeah, so to speak. It's they all differ. It's just part of the consideration of every instrument has its considerations. Trumpets players have a lot more sort of physical maintenance they need to do with
Yeah,
woodwind
with the
players.
lips, poor guy.
Yeah,
And I've
yeah, and
seen.
keep that in strength. You know, they've got to do like regular workouts, which saxophone players do, but it's much more critical for trumpet players and brass players. With saxophone players, you know, out of a box of say 5 reeds, I'll probably get 1, maybe 2 that I'll play professionally. I
Okay.
might practice with another one of them, maybe another one. You know, there's all sorts of scraping tools you can get, which are really helping that.
Right. So you
all the
can
assistant musicians.
shape them.
Yeah, I'd say an inexact science with the naked eye. There are I've had teachers in the past which have used Mark Walton from Sydney. He was using a whatever the machine is, where you put the reed in and he measures the exact thickness to some sort of crazy minute detail, and he's got all the equations of how they're supposed to be to resonate properly. But yeah, it's a difficult thing to master. Yeah, it's very much like that. It's and you know, then there's oboe players and bassonists who have 2 reeds and they have to make their own. I mean, that's, you know, whenever I'm struggling with reeds.
Man, I love the bassoon and the oboe, the clarinet as well. You know, even though everybody calls it the misery stick, I love the clarinet and the sound of it.
Yeah,
is
me too.
So beautiful, and especially the bass clarinet. That's one of the things that just like makes my knees go weak. You know, it's just beautiful.
You're not the only one. Bass clarinets are it's just such an incredible sound.
Yeah, so that's more of a bendy sex whistle than the saxophone.
Yeah.
Have you seen that classic FM's Guide to the Orchestra?
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Yes.
Was it Bendy Sex Whistle?
Yeah,
it's quite appropriate.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and the slidey fart horn for the trombone.
Perfect.
The squeaky cheek exploder for the trumpet. It's brilliant. Yeah, nice. I remember a few years ago when we were doing the proms and the stuff at the Royal Albert Hall, you know, then we're on the radio and like, oh, you know, Captain Flappy wants a bit more of the screech planks, and people are just there, they've got no idea what's going on. And we're like, yeah, sweet, we'll give a bit more of that. And, oh, you got to, you know, put the mics out for the jazz coffins, and you know, it's brilliant.
Captain Flappy, I've known a few of them.
Yeah. Well, you know, depending where you are, there's a whole bunch of them around. Yeah, funny. Everybody always wants to put in their 2 cents. That unfortunately happens quite often with us. I don't think it happens so much with you guys, does it? People don't come up. People don't come up and tell you, oh, you know, maybe you should have played that or that. Have you ever had that?
Yeah, you'd be surprised.
Really?
Yeah, people say like weird things like I can't think of anything recently, but in the past, you know, like come up to you and like after like say you've done an hour set or something, and they say, well, your concert was so short, and or your concert was so long, or you know, there's a joke. I won't mention the names, but somebody was doing a concert up in Scotland, and these 2 elderly women came up in the second set up and said, you know, do you take requests? And the saxophone player said yes. They said, could you not play the second set, please? Because they wanted to hear the rest of the band. You'd be surprised how you know.
Wow.
You must have seen it, Ronnie. People like just come up and start saying things to the band, like, you know, I preferred this version of that standard you played. You know, the version that's in Latin or not in Latin, or it's like,
right.
You know, like they've heard this version once.
Yeah, that's your business.
Yeah.
No, I mean, yeah, we get more of, you know, people, oh no, you need to turn this up, or you need to turn that up, or, you know, oh, this isn't good, or that isn't good. And you know, it normally tends to be a relative of said musician who wants that musician to be louder than everybody else. Everybody louder than everybody else.
That's a tough conversation, and it's a great one to have, especially in this context with, like, you know, engineers and musicians. I've definitely experienced it in different on both sides, and I'm sure I've joked. I'm sure I've annoyed sound engineers, you know, by getting too involved. But, you know, for sometimes when I'm listening to a band, for example, say I'm listening to a jazz quartet with a saxophone. Now, I would never say this to an engineer, but when I hear it, I like to hear, like I hear on a record, saxophone just to the, I need to hear all the detail of that. It's sort of leading the solo, if it's his solo, obviously, or her solo. But some engineers keep it quite flat, so you can hear it, but you don't get the full effect of it. And I think within that sort of understanding of how you like it, it's such a personal preference.
Very subjective.
I do not envy. Well, I mean, my business is subjective enough as well, but everybody has their personal opinion about that. But they're all, in a sense, when you think about it, they're right and they're justified. It's just the unenviable part of your job is trying to satisfy it. So, I mean, you're never going to do it. Some people hate the saxophone. Some people hate the trumpet. The trumpet's too loud. Some people hate, they want the piano to be the loudest thing because they, maybe that's just their preference. But
yeah, no, I mean, if we're talking about a quartet, as you mentioned, I agree with you 100%. I normally, when I've got a quartet or a quintet, which is say piano, bass, drums, and a trumpet and a saxophone, I would normally treat the rhythm section as the rhythm section, and then I would treat the other instruments as I would do a vocal, right? Because I'm not, when I've got a vocal, even if I've got a trio and a vocal, right, I'm not gonna have the vocal on the exact same level as I would the rhythm section, because it's a focal point. For one, they're right there in the middle of the stage. They're the ones that's kind of conveying the message, and not saying that a trio can't engage with the audience or anything else, but it's just like this is a focal point, and this is a thing. This is the message. That obviously, music is great with and without lyrics, right? But if music has lyrics and they've got someone singing it, then it is kind of a focal point to it. It doesn't matter if the lyrics or the music was written first, it doesn't matter, right? But they're there for a reason. It's the same way that if a song is written with 5 parts and each of these, or 5 instruments, 5 voices, if you will, each of those are as important as the other. But whenever somebody goes out and they do a solo or there's a break point, obviously that instrument then gets a preference. But if you add a vocal on top, that then becomes the focal point. That's how I normally treat it.
Yeah.
With a big band, it's a different thing. You're just trying to, fight fires everywhere, trying to pull things down as much as you can.
Therein comes the sort of, well, I'm not speaking for your industry, but just from my small amount of mixing experience, that's the creativity, and that's amazing because not just to take us out of a very familiar context of playing at Ronnie Scott's and mixing at Ronnie Scott's, but when you hear a sound, there's the balance. I suppose there's 2 things I was going to say. One, that there's the, this sort of concept of I can hear everything, so it's fine, is the level thing. Then I can hear everything, so the mix, that sounds good. But then you start to get into the stylistic things, like you say about the vocal. That's the focal point right now. We need to hear that, and then there's the taking advantage of the good and bad sounds you have. Like the piano could be incredible, the piano could be average, and that will dictate how you mix something, and how it sounds. You can't make everything sound like a Keith Jarrett record if it's not playing a piano that'll satisfy that.
Yeah.
And so I suppose that's the where I take my hat off to you guys, in compromise, to get good sounds out of compromised situations, especially, that's a tough gig.
It is. That's kind of how I've always thought of our job, or the way I look at an engineer and think whether this guy is a good engineer or a bad engineer, or not. I wouldn't say bad, but not as good engineer. If you can walk into a room and get a desk, you don't know what it is, you don't know what it was going to be like before you walked in there, but taking what you've got and doing the best with what you've got and making it okay, at least not people running out, with either bleeding ears or just being completely unhappy about it. Because I mean, we are kind of a part of the band,
Totally.
We deliver a service to you guys and also to the audience, so we got to keep you guys happy, keep the audience happy, and also in there somewhere try and make ourselves happy as well. And maybe sometimes you're allowed to express yourself artistically, as you said.
Yeah.
Other times it's really mixed by numbers. You know, you get told this is how it's going to be and this is how it should be, and you follow the script, and that's how that goes. But yeah, it's but like I said, for me the sort of comb with which I where I measure good engineers from average engineers from bad engineers are the people who can take any situation and make something good out of it, or make it better than it would have been had anybody else been there. And not be like, oh, I don't have my right toys, I can't do this gig, or this is not good enough, I can't do this gig. That to me doesn't compute.
Yeah. That reminds me of as I suppose I'll be about 20 years old, I started sort of discovering this feeling, this sense of the importance of the audio situation, be it like the technical or personnel responsibilities that were in effect. And this band I was playing with called K in Australia, in Perth, really amazing band. Had a Grant Windsor on keyboards, who lived in London for many years.
Yeah,
Dane Alderson on bass, who plays in the Yellow Jackets now, right. And Andy Fissenden on drums, who's one of the scariest drummers alive. But anyway, all the different venues we'd go to, there was this one engineer, no matter what system we had, like whether it was an amazing system or bad, or a tiny system, he'd always make it sound incredible. His name was Victor O'Connor. He's sadly no longer with us. Just very passionate about sounding. He knew exactly what to do. Knew those frequencies, where to get the kick, where to get the bass, where to get everything, the whole PA tune to sound good wherever we were. And I remember saying to him once, I said, Victor, how do you do that? I said, what's the frequencies? What are you doing? He said, I can't tell you that. He said, that's my art.
Oh.
And he was very passionately serious about it. But also with Victor, there's a massive element of, a little bit, not fuck you, but this is me.
You do your thing, I'll do mine.
Yeah, I'll take this. This is my job.
All right.
Yeah, you would have loved him. He's a legend. But I remember. You sometimes you walk into a venue. You know what it's like. I mean, we might be drifting from the conversation here a bit.
I know.
You walk into a venue. There's massive subs there, and there's a great PA, and you're not feeling anything. There's the kick could just be too subby or not subby enough, or where all that sort of area of making music feel good. I mean, you listen to an album like Voodoo by D'Angelo, where Russ Elevato's mixed that bass end. That's the life-changing, feel, as far as I can't remember when that album came out, but I think it's about 20 years ago now. But I've always been, for about 20 years, I suppose, very interested in how that why that makes you feel the way it does.
Well, there's when you look, the way I try and sort of explain EQ and the need for EQ is, if you imagine you've got a rectangular box, right? And you go from the bottom to the top, say absolute silence, to 120 decibels, which is the threshold of pain. Nobody's going to want anything that loud. Okay, anything above that, you're causing super, super serious damage. And then you've got your frequency range from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. Now imagine this is a rectangular box and you've got 4 or 5 musicians in there. Each instrument has their own resonant frequencies. And you have to, if you've got all the frequencies open all the time of all 4 instruments, right? Things are going to get in each other's way. Things are going to get muddy. Things are going to get more pronounced than other things. Like 110 hertz, for instance, that's kind of where your bass guitar's low end lives. So you want to probably take some of that out of your kick drum, but you're going to boost 63 hertz for the kick drum, like a 22-inch kick drum, to get that thud, right? So you'll do a little peak and a trough. So you get the bass and the kick drum to sit nicely with each other in that lower frequency spectrum range. but also being out of the way of each other. So you'll do a high pass on the bass to say maybe 80 or something. So that's out of the way of the kick drum. All the sort of lower frequencies will normally come from stage. Let's say smaller venues. Obviously, you change these things, but then you've got the piano sits anywhere between 40 hertz and about 4.6 kilohertz is the sort of range of a piano's notes, and then you're considering harmonics and these sorts of things, a vocal, whether it be a female vocal, male vocal, and you got to fill this rectangular box with all those instruments and not let them get in each other's way. So that's kind of how, and that would be a mono image, if you will. And then you go to stereo, then you've got two rectangles next to each other, and then panning comes into play where you can put things in different places. So you can have sort of the same frequency range and you don't have to cut as much, but you can just get things wider so they're out of each other's way. So these are things that, that one can always consider when, making some sound.
But for me, with my level of mixing, when I mix something, it does take a long time to consider, okay, and what's this bass has this frequency, this bass drum has this guitar part fits in here, the lower end of the synth or the keyboard sits in here. That sort of everything below, 1K, is like
build up.
That'll change every time. And obviously, but like when engineers have to deal with it all the time, like, okay, so then this next bass drum's an 18-inch bass drum, so then that's probably sitting around 110, and so and then you've got
100-ish.
A little, what's sorry?
About 80 to 100 sort of.
Oh, really?
Sort of spot.
And then you've got an acoustic bass. So then you, I'm assuming, what I usually do is take that, keep the bass drum there and put keep the sub bass of the double bass under there. Is that about what you do?
Well, when you've got an acoustic bass, I sort of I'll do a high pass to maybe 80 anyway, depending on the space. I'll just refer back to what I do, say in Ronnie's. The difference between an 18 and 22-inch kick drum, obviously, as we mentioned, the lower resonant frequencies differ. So you can tailor that. But with an acoustic bass, most of the time, I'll sort of leave it fairly open on the bottom, take about maybe 280 hertz out, sort of not a tight cue, but, the space where a double bass can get muddy. And what I'll do is I'll boost a little bit of 1K just to get the strings out so you can hear somebody plucking the strings and playing on. It just gives a bit more definition.
Yeah.
There are some other tricks that you can do with it as well. But yeah, I mean, it will change from day to day, band to band, the position.
Yeah, exactly.
Whether the double bass is stood right next to the drums or whether the double bass is stood at the front, like when we get the Mingus big band, the bass player stands in front of the drums, right at the front of the stage. When you get the Ronnie Scott's Jazz Orchestra, Steve's right in the back with the double bass. So it really depends on all that, the size of your stage and all these things. So it comes with just experience of kind of listening to the band. We do these things, the EQing whilst you guys are doing. We can do a preliminary sort of EQ. I mean, in my head, I've got a whole bunch of cheat sheets of pictures of EQs and stuff that I've got that I sort of run through. This is this kind of band. It's a funk band. It's a jazz band. It's a fusion thing. It's a blues thing. Everybody's got a different kind of sound, and I've got these little pictures that just that's fun, and dial things in, and then you can tailor it from there. So yeah, it's a combination of listening and experience, I suppose. Just having
a lot
those
of experience
pictures in your head.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but it's so you say about the importance of a sound engineer to a band. I don't think it could be understated. I don't think it could be more than an extra member of the band. Like it is, you're the fifth member of a quartet. How you think of a jazz drum kit could be anything from what are you listening to, something like Kind of Blue, to Bill Stewart's like sort of really crisp open hi-hats, like open cymbals, or like, what's your feeling of that, how that drum should sound? What are you doing with the top end? How, what are you doing with the cymbals? Is the snare just how pronounced is the snare? How are you EQing it using the under snare mic? I mean, all these things are just, for me as a listener, they make a massive difference, to the style, to the impact of everything. No, it's really
And
I should say I've never done live sound for a reason.
well, I mean, I think that's why, as you said, the sound engineer, I think that's why bands tend to, when they find an engineer that they like, that they get on with, and they like the sound of that engineer, they'll tend to then say, okay, you're coming with us now, and you're gonna do the sound for us. If it's something that's important to the band, other bands are just like, it's jazz, or it's whatever. We'll just deal with whoever's there. We'll explain to them as best we can, and then we'll just hope for the best.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying one thing is better than the other, but for me personally, I think it's probably better if you have a sound that that is as important as the music. It's not about the right notes all the time, but it's about how they sound. And if you've got something, then it is a good thing to have just that extra person on board, especially if you go on tour, you get to different venues every day, and you've got things that you, as a musician and as a band, that you have to consider, you have to get through. There's breakfast, there's sound check, there's, changing your clothes. There's all these sorts of things that you have to think about. And if you have that extra person on board that can deal with all the technical shit, that can go, to a venue manager, a venue engineer, that looks after all that stuff, that sets up your mic, you don't have to worry about it. You can be in the back having a coffee, relax, get ready, warm up your reeds, warm up your mouth, do all these things so you're ready. And then when you walk on stage, you don't have to worry about these things because it's already done. That person's role is to do that, to also make you a bit more comfortable, you and the band and whoever it is, to know that, there's another guy on your side in the technical world. So I do think it's an important thing, and it definitely does get overlooked quite a lot. But that could be, the reasons for that could be multiple reasons, because
largely financial.
Budget. Yeah, it could be budget. It could be all sorts of it.
From my touring experience of 8 years of touring with the Kyle Eastwood band, we definitely had a quite wide variation of, everything from Tokyo Blue Note and Ronnie Scott's, and like the sort of top care and places you trust the sound, to some pretty crazy places of disorganization. There was one time where I had to go and EQ the snare at a venue show and remain nameless, because I'd never do that normally, but it was just feeding back. We've been there for 2 hours. Ooh. And it was the person's first day on the job as well. So they'd never mixed a band at all. So and everything in between. But I did get to, I think it was Graham Flowers who at one stage he'd give me grief by, we'd get to a sound check and he'd just get on the mic straight away and say, "Can Graham have some less 2K in his monitor, please?" So it's always my number one request.
Well, I mean, you're not wrong. That's where they call it the quack, on a saxophone, and it can be off-putting. And to be totally honest with you, that's one of the first things I would cut out of a saxophone mic, regardless. When I roll through my pictures in my head, let's say I'm coming up, you walk on and you've got your tenor with you, I'll be like, 80 hertz gone, 140 boost, wide Q, 2K gone, and a bit of the top, just take that away. And normally you're pretty happy with it off the bat. And then obviously we can tailor things. But like I said, I've got sort of preliminary images in my head of what the EQ should sound like with the mic that I'm using. Obviously it changes with from mic to mic, from room to room, these sorts of things. And that's, we got to sort of, have our heads screwed on a little bit and know a little bit about the equipment, because, you can have all the talent in the world, but if you don't have the knowledge, and how to apply that knowledge, then I'm not saying you can't get it right, but it's just going to take a little bit longer. So it's one of those things where experience does definitely trumps.
Yeah. How many decibels would you start with boosting the sax? Did you say it was 120?
140.
140.
Yeah, I normally do maybe a 2-3 decibel. It's really just a little bit, just to give it a bit of warmth, with a wide cue. So it's not. There's a general rule of thumb where we say boost wide, cut narrow. So if you cut frequencies out, you don't want to cut too much of it out. You want to sort of like hone in on the treble frequency and just cut that out, because the more you take away, you're going to end up sounding like this. It's just not right. The same reason why we say don't cup the grill of the microphone, because you're closing it off and you're not allowing all the frequencies to get through. You're not allowing a capsule to capture the sound. So you can't hold a microphone like that and then tell me it sounds like shit. First of all, learn mic technique. Second of all, what does shit sound like? I don't know. I never stuck a microphone in there. But I do, and then I'll do maybe a cut at 2K, quite narrow, as I said, maybe 3. I work in sort of 3 dB increments most of the time. It's another rule of thumb, because they say that your ear can only hear the difference of 3 decibels. Like anything in between, you might notice it, but for you to know, oh, this is louder or this is quieter, 3 decibels are the sort of increments in which you're able to hear a difference in sound. I don't know how much I agree with that, because I've heard differences in things by doing a 1 dB or a 2 dB or a kind of boost or cut, anything in between. But a general rule of thumb and a starting point is 3. Start with 3. If you don't hear it, go more. If it's too much, go less. It's just that. It's, like I said, little sort of starting points where we usually start.
Yeah. And I do that's a really interesting frequency for the saxophone. I think that 2K, the all like a couple of mics I've looked at. The one I use for recording is Telefunken AK-47. It's called. It's like some sort of copy of an 87 and a 49. I think is where they sort of tried to shoot it in, or maybe a 47 and a 49. But they
it's a AK-47.
Yeah, it's great. But it's got like a really silky smooth, like 1.5 to 2.5. It's just nice. It's a great fit. Like, so when I play, I'd never send it with any EQ for anything, and it always just sort of works as a good match for my instrument, and probably my sound, my combination of what goes on in here, my reeds and my mouthpieces. Yeah, it's really interesting, all that.
It's as it's the thing that you said about your mouth. I think I see probably if we just take the 3 common horn section instruments, the sax, the trumpet, and the trombone, the amount of movement, jaw movement, and throat movement that's involved with playing the saxophone is like 100 times more than trumpeters and trombonists. I think. How much does that? Do you form the note with the hollow of your mouth and then bring it out? How does it work?
I don't exactly know.
Okay. But if you open your mouth a bit bigger on the inside, you get a lower note.
Well, there's a few different schools of thought about that, and a lot of people say you've got to open your throat to get a big sound, or to get like a specific sound, and some people say that you've got to relax it. But what is a very sort of widely accepted thing about the saxophone and instruments that you do put in your mouth is that your throat shape does make a difference, whatever it is. So different people, I think that's one of the reasons why saxophonists have such a personal sound, although every instrument
has a different jaw and a different...
Yeah.
It's
there's a, like, what angle your teeth are on, your jaw is on, if your, your bottom teeth sit back, or they sit even, or they sit forward. That has a really big impact.
Wow.
The size, the actual physicality of your body and the size of your throat And then there's the other things about your language. I haven't exactly studied this, but like when French people speak, they use different syllables, different shapes in their throat. They have different abilities and they have different sort of resting positions. So I think these things all contribute to how the saxophone becomes a very personal extension of your own voice.
It's very interesting that the language you speak affects your sound as a saxophone player. It makes so much sense, because some languages are very open and very, you get any of the Latin languages, apart from French, which is a bit more sort of restricted and a bit more closed. But you get something like Italians. It's just like rah rah rah. It's just very open and very fluid. And then when you sort of go towards Russian and Polish and the Eastern Bloc sort of languages, it feels like it's tight. When they speak, there's a lot of friction. There's a lot of sort of, fricative sounds. It's something I've never even considered, but it makes sense. Would you then recommend that horn players be polyglots? Would that help?
When I was learning classical saxophone, like quite seriously when I was younger, there's a bunch of syllables that I remember people telling me, like, you got to say it like, because I was trying to copy some sort of very old French saxophone styles. And they say, well, it's a lot about this. I don't know how true all this information is, but I was getting told it was a lot about this ooh, ooh sound that they were making in the French language that you got to copy. Now, coming from Australia, we definitely did not have that syllable in our, vocabulary. So, it was sort of imagining a different throw position. And, I think people have done some research using, I don't know if they've done too much fMRI or MRI. They've definitely done X-rays and things like that to have a look at the throat. But with a lot of things like with music for me, I try not to get too involved in the really detailed technicalities of certain things.
Yeah.
There's still a lot to be said to change my sound. I'll practice long tones every day the same way and make sure that the sound's coming out the way I want it. And not worried. I definitely take care of the technical things that need to be addressed, but not get too overly critical about it. Keep a very human relationship with the instrument rather than a cerebral technicality. I want to have I want to maintain as natural as a relationship with the instrument that I can.
That's the best way to do it, man. That brings it right back around to what I said in the beginning when I was learning the theory behind music, playing guitar, and how that it got in my head so much that it became a hurdle for me to overcome. And the way that you're approaching it is the best way. Just feel natural, feel feel what works for you, because I think that the only way that you can really get your sound is if you're in the moment, you're right there, you're playing, and you're paying attention to everything that's involved and how it sits and how it feels, and then do it like that. And when you get the sound you like, try and replicate it. See if there's something that you did differently. These sorts of things. It's fantastic. It's almost like a meditation, isn't it?
Oh, totally. When I practice, actually, that's one of the things I tell all students is that everything's with a metronome. Everybody will agree with that. But when I'm practicing my long notes, I start with a metronome on 60 BPM, and I take that into a lot of scale studies too. So I kind of didn't realize it, but I was starting with a meditation, and you sort of meditate into the sound, and it's sort of the best for me. It's the best way to start a practice session. You're basically starting with a 5 to 10 minute meditation. And but within that, that's a concept which I try to carry forward. But it's also quite difficult, with all the technicalities that we talk about today, and especially jazz can get quite technical, to maintain that balance of, I suppose we're always recalibrating that, to get your head out of thinking too much detail.
Get out of the way. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's half the half the thing. But then you can't get it too much out of the way because you need
You have to think about what's going on.
Yeah. So it's like it's a very interesting. For me, that's always a very interesting balance with all these disciplines. I love I love the two of my passions being like of my many passions, obviously music and audio and aviation and anything that combines like science and art for me, and the balance between a technical process and an artistic process. And that's always something that takes a careful consideration, and jazz is a perfect example of that.
It is. It's I consider jazz to be like almost a higher level of music it's because it's so intricate and so technically it's on another level, and I think that's, for me personally, what it growing up, it was always like, put the jazz is just a bunch of noise, and I think it's more a problem that I didn't understand it. Where you get pop music or you get rock and roll and you get blues and you get stuff like that. It's more simple and it's basic and it appeals to everybody because you can feel it in your gut, right? And then it feels like that's high school, right? And then you go into higher education, that's jazz,
Yeah, in a way, yeah.
Because it's so intricate and it's got so many nuances and it's got so many little things. And I mean, now I absolutely love it. I adore it. I've been in the, but when I started working in jazz, I was not at all a jazzer. I fell into this job by luck, by being there. I started working with the National Youth Jazz Orchestra as a work experience thing, and luckily, they liked what I was doing and they got me back. And then about 5 months later, I started working with Ronnie Scott's, obviously through Bill Ashton, Miles's dad, and the whole thing. So, I guess I cheated a little bit.
Crazy.
But when I started, it was sort of, I did the job in a kind of technical way until I started, feeling it a little bit more. Now it's great, hearing you guys make little musical jokes to each other on stage and stuff, little riffs and little stuff, things here and there, and it's listening to the conversation that you guys have on stage musically, it's quite a magical thing, and I think it's hard to get into it if you don't fully understand it. So it
is. But there's it's true what you say. The more you understand, the more you get about jazz. There's so many levels to it, like of your appreciation. But also, one of the things when you were probably young and leave the jazz over there, as you said, it's there's I think there's jazz that everybody will like. Some people will like some part of jazz. It's just getting exposed to the right sort of gateway drug, if you will. Everyone needs a gateway drug, to get their head into it.
Yeah. I think probably the thing is maybe it's also influence, of the people in your life, and
Definitely.
Hearing contemporary jazz right off the bat, you're gonna be blown away a little bit. You're gonna because that's how I thought of jazz. Is that it's everybody's just playing a solo, everybody's playing a different song at the same time, and contemporary jazz can be like that a little bit sometimes. It's hard to know where the 1 and the 4 is sometimes. But again, it's a higher understanding and a higher level. I've not attained it yet. But maybe one day. I don't know.
You still practicing?
My guitar?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. As I say, not quite as much as I like. Especially now during the quarantine, I kind of kick myself for not sitting down and playing more. But I'm doing other sorts of things which aren't solo pursuits, if you will. because I've got the family here as well, and everybody's trying to keep everybody entertained. And
Of
we're
course.
both doing homeschooling. We do a bit. I do the math, and she does the English. And I've got my bow, and I bought a bow for my daughter, so we do some archery. I've got a target in the
Cool.
backyard. A lot of baking, a lot of things. I've acquired I've baked a whole bunch of new things that I've never baked before. I've gotten into sourdough bread quite a lot, which is fantastic.
Oh man,
Love it.
everyone's into sourdough bread. I mean, I'm into it too. I'm just I'm doing some research, about to jump off the sourdough cliff, but I'm
No.
not sure my waistline can support it. But we'll see.
Well, I mean, the thing is, it's so versatile. It really is, And once I'm the kind of guy, when I get a new thing, I'll immerse myself completely. I guess I'm just a geek like that. I want to find out how this thing works and why it works and what else can I do with it. Like I said, when I bought my bow, it's a compound bow, so there's lots of other little bits that you have to add to the bow. It's not just a bow and a string and an arrow and you shoot. You've got the drop away rest, which has to be tuned precisely so that when the string comes back, the rest falls down and doesn't get in the fletcher's way. Tuning your sights, tying in the peep sight, you got to separate the strings, and you got to put the peep sight right in the middle, right in the right place. And when it came to the sourdough bread, our neighbor, lovely fella, great family, he texts me. He's like, "Hey man, do you want a sourdough starter?" And I'm like, "Hey, why not? Let's give it a go." And here I am, delving into it, sitting until 1 o'clock in the morning, watching YouTube videos on, different techniques. And initially I felt like a failure, right? Because these breads just did not come out the way that I wanted them to. The first two, they were okay. They tasted fine. But not quite, and I put a lot of work into it, because with the sourdough, the dough itself, it takes a really long time. It takes a day to prepare the dough before you can bake it, because you mix it all together, then you got to let it stand so it, all the things come together chemically. Then you then you net it, and then you add salt and more water, and then you net it again, then you let it stand, and then you separate it, and then you fold it over. And it's just like, it was so much work. And like I said, it felt like, I wasted 2 days baking 2 breads that I really had to force down, because I'm not one to fucking throw things away. And then I finally found a good recipe that was super easy, no netting, no nothing. It's a really nice wet recipe, because a lot of the moisture levels are different, and the way that the dough responds depending on how much moisture or water you've got in there is also different, and how long you got to let it stand. So I found a winner recipe, and I'm sticking with that one. But
great,
because you have to feed the starter every day, right? You have to give it flour and water and mix it in, and then it grows. To keep it active. Otherwise, the bacteria and the stuff, the yeast bacteria, they're going to die. They're going to starve. Mm-hmm. You can always start it back up again, but it takes a lot longer. But when you've got it, I've got a big olive jar that's full. And when you feed it every day, especially if you leave it outside, you can leave it in the fridge for a week and feed it once a week, because it just slows down the process. But that you have to throw, some of it off. And a lot of people throw that away, but you can make sourdough pancakes with that, with the amount that you threw off, that you now, because you're going to feed your jar with more flour and more water. And if you don't throw these off, it's going to boil over, because it keeps growing. Yeah. And you can make delicious pancakes. I always edit recipes when I get them. And so I made a nice coconut flour sourdough starter pancakes. Really delicious, very nice, with a bit of honey. Amazing. Perfect. Yes, lovely, man.
Little biltong.
Biltong. Yes, I did that. Yeah, I did that. I put the sourdough in, because there's a powdered biltong, which is if you dry it until it's like really, really, really dry. Normally, what we do back home is you'll just put it in a bag and hammer the shit out of it until it's this powder. you know, and then you put that on a sandwich. It's delicious. A bit of butter, bit of powdered biltong on a sandwich,
That
and you're
sounds
good to
amazing.
go.
Oh man.
But here I just put it in the blender, just through, job done, easy peasy.
Oh man. Man, so I saw some of the pictures of the biltong you'd made, and man, I've cut down the meat I eat in the last 6 months. Really cut it down, and then sometimes I go through periods I don't want any meat, and I think you know, I naturally got to a healthier place with like not eating too much meat, too much beef, especially red meat. And then I see a picture like of that biltong you just made, and I'm like, oh, my body just goes, get me some of that.
Give me
You
some.
know,
Yeah, I want some
yeah,
protein. But
yeah,
I
pretty
mean,
much.
you can make it at home. It's so easy. When we lived in Italy, I made biltong in a cardboard box.
Yeah, but like, is that for me? Is that safe? Is like, how do you do it in a safe way? Like,
Oh, it's safe as it's going to be, mate. You know, the vinegar cures the meat, and I mean, beef is the kind of meat you can eat raw anyway.
yeah,
You just catch that bull and, you know, take a bite out of the
yeah,
backside. The meat's good. It's not like pork or chicken, which, you know, you have to be careful with. You have to cook it. You know, there could be other
yeah.
things. But things like beef, most game, you know, the meat's quite safe
Mm.
to eat. And once you introduce vinegar to it, it's cured and everything's dead and it's preserved.
So you just get beef from the butcher here,
Yeah.
and you. So what kind of cut would you get for biltong?
Normally, you get the top side or the silver side because you don't have to get a tender cut of meat because it's just going to become chewy anyway. So
Yeah,
you're not going to make biltong from a fillet. That would just
yeah,
be a waste. You can, and it's going to be nice, but you're wasting the fillet because the fillet is so much nicer if you just put it on a grill for a bit.
yeah.
Where you take the top side or the silver side, which is normally on the sort of hind half, you know, the from the
Oh yeah.
butt is the first cut they take off. So it's sort of a leaner kind of meat, and it's traditionally more sort of tough. But like I said, since you're curing it and you're drying it, it's going to be chewy anyway. So
Yeah.
you don't want to take the best cuts of meat. Go get, and the best thing about this, it's normally some of the cheapest cuts as well. So
Mm.
you can go to your butcher and you get some silver side or some top side. Have them cut it about 1.5 to 2 inches, nice thick pieces. Salt that shit for about 2 hours, nice coarse salt. Bury it in salt for about 2 hours. Again, depending on the thickness of your cut, put it in the salt, stick it in the fridge, come back, scrape the salt off because the salt just drains that excess blood out. You don't want any blood left in the meat because that's when you have problems with mold and rot and stuff like that. You want to get as much moisture out of there before you even, you know, because you're going to introduce the vinegar, the wet mix, which I use apple cider vinegar. I usually put a bit of balsamic vinegar in there as well, some Worcester sauce, a couple of drops, and maybe, if I'm feeling lucky, a bit of Tabasco. You know, it just depends on who I'm making it for. If
Yeah.
my family's going to eat it, I'm not going to put too much Tabasco in there. You want to keep things that are sort of vinegar based. You don't want oil bases because they coat rather than penetrate.
Mm.
And that's, again, when you start having troubles with mold and rot and things like that. Leave it in your wet mix after you scrape the salt off. Then you bath it in your wet mix for about an hour. You'll see the color will change. Take it out, put it aside. Then you've got your spices. Spice it. Make sure that it's all nice and spiced. Then you leave it in your fridge for about 12 to 16 hours. That's normally what I do. With the spice and the vinegar all in there. And then the next day you just hang it up. And all you need really is, like I said, when I made it in a box, a 60-watt bulb at the bottom, holes in the bottom of the box, holes in the top of the box, so the light just heats up the air enough for it to slowly circulate through. So there's a bit of movement of the air, and it doesn't cook it. The 60-watt bulb isn't, you know, it's not warm enough to cook your meat. It's just going to slowly dry it with the air. And that's it. Make sure the meat doesn't touch each other. Like if you've got two pieces next to each other, that they don't hang next to each other, that they're touching each other, then you won't have problems with mold. That's it. And you dry it to your to your preferred dryness or wetness, which can take anything from 2 to 5 days. And yeah, Bob's your uncle, mate. Then you cut that shit and you put it in your mouth.
You're going to have to do that. Might do that today.
Yeah, man. It's so super easy. It really is. I'll send you, after this, I'll send you my recipe, which I use for the spices and these sorts of things. And it's really super, super easy.
Sounds great.
I want to get back, just before we finish, I want to get back to, you say you were classically trained in saxophone, and did you say clarinet as well? Or
A little bit, mostly saxophone.
yeah. And this was all in high school, right?
Yeah. I suppose, everybody starts in the sort of it's just, very sort of simple exercises for saxophone. It's all the same, but no, I went down quite a serious classical, pursuit until I was, I still play a lot of classical and I love it, but it was, up until I was about 16, I was doing classical and jazz as equal pursuits.
Okay.
The idea of being a classical soloist was very, something I was very passionate about. But then the jazz bug took over.
Okay.
And yeah.
Right. So you got introduced to jazz at a young age.
Yeah, as I said, about 14 when I got this lessons from Serge Le Gueff. So from about 14, that's when the jazz
That's it.
taking over.
Did you, after high school, did you go into tertiary education? Did you study music at a university or a college?
Yeah, there was an incredible jazz institution in Perth, where a lot of people came through. It was an incredible institution, great teaching staff, and a great training ground. It really gave you a lot of they really hammered you. It was very tough on all the technicalities that you needed to play jazz. But I did a Bachelor of Jazz Performance.
Great.
But I also had classical lessons at the same time for about 2 years, my first 2 years of my bachelor degree. So I was kind of studying jazz, but I was pretty much practicing them both. Which really helped with the it meant that I didn't have to do as much sort of saxophonic practice. When I did jazz, it was like scales and things like that that were different. But I suppose all the technical requirements were satisfied by the classical stream.
Right. So that's what gave you that your good feel, because you've got when you play that. You've got such a good feel and a good vibe, and it's always a pleasure to watch you play. It's
I appreciate that.
Pleasure.
But I would say that didn't come from classical, though. I'd say that's something I aspire to. That's something I think is really important to me as a musician. The things I like, rhythm, feel, time, groove is so important. And I remember when I was in first year of university as a saxophone player, like I said, all these contemporaries of mine who went to this institution, Linda O, Troy Roberts, Dana Alderson, all these people, we were lucky to have the generation above us, we're like really, really incredible musicians. And there was a saxophone player I sat next to. I was second alto and he was first tenor, called James Sandon. As one of the most incredible saxophone players you probably never heard of, but he had an incredible time feel. And I remember he said once he did this solo in a big band. It was like a traditional 8-bar swinging bassy solo or something like that. And I said, man, that just sounds so good. I said, I don't know how you do that. I was 17. I've never experienced anything that close. Just feels so good. And he said, oh, it's all rhythm. He said, watch, I'll just do that solo again. They did the tune again. He said, I'll just choose random notes. And he just did random notes, but made it feel good. And it was a real sort of lesson to me about the difference between, obviously, harmony is massively important, but yeah, there's how feel and time and that influences a band. Yeah, something I'm very passionate about.
Yeah, I mean, but with some people it sticks, and with other people you don't, or it doesn't, rather. Because I mean, you can be technically as good as somebody else, but that person might not have the same feel. And like I said, the rhythm is, the notes you don't play are as important as the ones that you do play.
Totally.
It's and you see people who are technically great, but there's nothing there, and you walk away feeling empty almost.
Yeah.
Where, and with you, I don't know if it's something that you learned or practiced, or whether it was inside of you all along. You never know.
Who knows?
So did you meet Grant Windsor and the guys at college?
Yeah, the West Australian Academy of Performing Arts, or WAPA, where we all studied, or Edith Cowan University. Can't remember what it's called now. Yeah, that was where we all met. Brandon Allen as well.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of us that, it was like a massive melting pot, and we're all, Grant's in Melbourne now, Andy's in Virginia.
Right.
Dane's in Virginia, Andy's in Melbourne, Troy's in New York, although he's back in Perth now with the virus that we find ourselves in the middle of. But yeah, we all met there, and stay in touch and see each other whenever we're passing through.
That's good, man. Yeah, it's good. You can, there's like a fraternal bond you can see between you guys. It's great. It's nice if you got some old friends that you drag along, or they drag you along, and it's a good familial feeling, if you will.
Yeah.
Reading music. When did you start reading music, and how was that journey? Because that's something that I can read music, not fluently. I mean, I'm not going to be able to sit and play along, but I can read music, and I can follow the rhythm and everything like that along. But that's something that, I don't know, as a guitar player, I don't know if it's really necessary. I mean, for me, I really like to do it because I like to learn languages, and I like to, learn these things. But tell me a little bit about your reading music journey.
Everything. I was like the scholarship that I got at this school, Perth Modern School, in Perth in Western Australia. It was very much in the sort of Western classical tradition of learning to read, and everything about intonation and tone and time and all those sort of basics of music, and the fundamentals were really sort of drummed into you. But then so reading is very important, and it was something that I think I was competent at and fine. Like it was not a strength or a weakness. Right. Until I started. And one thing I thought was both great for my reading, and a lot of jazz musicians will know what I'm talking about here, which was equally great for my reading and great for my knowledge of music, was transcribing. So one of the best things that jazz musicians do, well, one of the best things a jazz musician can do, is to transcribe the solos of the masters.
Okay.
And so the best way, the best process I find, and that a lot of people agree with, is to, first of all, you listen to the solo until you can sing it perfectly, like right. Not just the notes in the right time, but all nuances, all tonal variations. If he or she is sharp or flat, you're with them, and then you put that information onto your instrument just using your ear. So okay. You've internalized the sound. Then after that, you write it down. Mm-hmm. So in formulating that really technical
write music, it down on the stave, right?
Yeah. Okay. So and that gives you so much more sort of analytical benefit from it. So that is when I started transcribing. I suppose I would have been 16, 17. That's when I felt like it really helped my reading, because my comprehension of the written notes was so internalized, because I'd literally spend, sometimes I spend 2 hours on a bar. Mm-hmm. If someone was going, you'd have to do all those notes and what's the rhythmic values and counting it from different angles, and then that's when the reading, I think my reading got stronger and stronger. And as you know, London has a big sort of commercial music scene of studio sessions and film scores and albums and things, and the standard of reading in London is
quite high.
It's as high as it can get anywhere in the world. It's pretty confronting sometimes. I understand that I've seen people, pressure situations. I've seen people be put under the highest levels of stress, and just the reading is not something that's consideration. You're just expected to be able to read anything that's put in front of you.
Yeah.
So there's that part's been beneficial. But just on an overall thing about that I suppose I feel about how important it is to read music. Now I'd say there's so many amazing jazz musicians who don't read any music, and so many amazing musicians of all disciplines that don't read music. But for me, it's just like you just said, you like reading, you like languages. It's it's a way of for me, like even if I look at a tune or a Chris Potter solo or a Seamus Blake solo or someone's solo, you can read straight away what they're doing.
Yeah.
It's for me, it's a great way of just getting through a lot of information in a different way.
I agree.
So yeah, it's
reading is definitely an important thing, for a professional musician. It's something that that can't be overlooked and can't be underlined enough, the importance of being able to do that. No, for me, it's just a magical thing to watch you guys. Just like I'm still in awe. You just sit there and like you get these, most of the time, especially like you guys do a sports set, the rehearsals at the pub, and you come down and you're like, here's your music, and everybody sits down and boom, they just nail it. It's it's like watching magic happen. It's fantastic. So,
I've been on some pretty scary recording sessions where the first take, of a big band that's like at 350 BPM or maybe 320 BPM. The first take is just absolutely perfect. People flying around everywhere. It's just that's what's expected. And obviously, the next stage. Nigel Hitchcock put up a great thing actually on. It was an interview he did for Yamaha just about a week ago, and he talks about there's a lot of these time things we're talking about, and it sort of reminded me of this thing. Like you're expected to read it, but like the jazz ensembles at Ronnie's or anything, you're expected to read this music. Say I'm playing second tenor or second alto, I'm expected to, second guess what the lead player is going to do. Are they what vibrato are going to do? They're going to hit this, hard. Really shadow them. Or if you're on the lead alto, you're anticipating, how the lead trumpet's going to phrase this. How is he going to interpret this particular accent? The reading of it is one thing, the sort of assimilation of the information, but internalizing it with the feel, touch, time that to make music. Now that's what's expected,
Yeah, that's where the magic comes in.
Yeah.
That's why it's not just, you can't just be technically proficient. You have to have that. It's almost like a sixth sense, isn't it?
You in a way, yeah.
Learn and you internalize it. It's like I said, it really is, my sort of journey into jazz and learning. It's like, this new world and watching it. It's a magical thing. It really is, and sometimes you just stand there and it goosebumps. It's fantastic. It's really good. And to see you guys do it, it's nice. Like, the salsa night that we have upstairs at Ronnie's.
Oh yeah.
Friday nights, right? I love doing that. I love doing that gig. Or the other guys aren't always as keen to do that. I think maybe I've got a soft spot for it because it was the first gig that I did in Ronnie's.
Cool.
But also I love standing there watching people dance who can really dance. It's just like, wow, just appreciating art, is even though you're not involved in it personally, but you're in that situation, you're part of the whole thing, and just watching, it's better than going to a museum because it's a living art. It's a living thing that's unfolding and becoming right in front of your eyes. And, you can play the same song 20 times and each time there's going to be difference, small differences depending on who you play with and all these sorts of things. So it's, it's such a beautiful thing. And I think especially now in this time, we need to, exclamate how important art is for us as a human race, you know, because it, you know, it was one of the first things that we did to communicate, you know, and to bring society together, to bring, you know, when we're in our fucking straw villages 10,000 years ago, we were, you know, telling stories and singing songs and beating drums and stuff like that, you know, to make this telling of a story come alive. And in that, you know, if I can bring that back to incorporating as many senses as you can to really bring something home. If you do that through music, it's something you hear, you feel it, you know, your body moves, everything is just, it's this great thing. And if, you know, if you've got an understanding of it, you can even visualize it in your head or whatever, you know, whether it be in different colors. Cause some people, you know, when, I don't know, maybe Sam Leake, when he's doing his doctorate, might touch on this. Something that I heard and read about before is, if you want to teach yourself about the frequencies, if you visualize them as colors, you know, you've heard of white noise, right? That's all the sounds, like all the frequencies all together all the time. Like, you know, the shh on the TV.
Yeah.
Right? Then you get the brown sound, which is the lower frequency range. And then you get the pink sound, which is, you know, upper frequency range. So if you know, you can go through the color spectrum and you can imagine different frequencies or different notes as different colors.
Yeah.
You know, and it can just be this little explosion of color in your head as music's happening. So you know, it's another sort of interesting way of internalizing it and visualizing music. And I know that people do use that to try and, you know, learn where frequencies are and stuff like that. So maybe there's something there.
Totally.
Yeah, man. Thank you very much for taking the time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Having a chat. Before we go, how have you been? How have you been, and how have you been keeping yourself busy during this time? Lots of online. I see there's a lot of online things happening at the moment where, you know, there's ensembles and things, and it's such a good thing, because, you know, if I can just bring back again the point that art and music in this time is so important, you know. Not just for musicians and people who work in the industry, but also for everybody else, you know, because it just brings a sense of connectedness between us all. It just brings a little bit of sunshine out in us. How have you been dealing with it? Have you been doing loads of these ensemble things?
Yeah, I've been contributing wherever I can with lots of people's different projects, different collaborations. Lots of big band, or, you know, different ensembles. Did an Irish, excuse me, an old Irish tune with an incredible Irish flute player called Mike McGoldrick.
Okay.
Which, you know, it's been amazing to, like, you know, do all these collaborations. But just like you say, it reminds us of how important not only art is, but this physical connection we get by experiencing it. And as fantastic as the internet is, as fantastic as all these resources are, you know, that magic of actually seeing something happen live is, you'll never recreate that.
No.
You know, and that's what we all, like, you know, that's obviously what we all miss. And I've got a couple of live concerts happen, not very many of them, but it's been really great to see, because, like, when you see something that's recorded, it's you know, it's as amazing as you know, all the recordings we hold so dear to us. But when you see something that's actually happening live, it did change things in my head. I was like, wow, I'm actually watching this, you know, this happen live, and that just reminds you of how much we all miss experiencing these things together. Excuse me. It's yeah, but you know, I think like everybody, we're just doing what we can at the moment. You know, practicing. I'm being as productive as I can. I'm, you know, getting as much done as I can, you know, while taking care of you know, things I need to take care of. Physical and mental health. You know, I'm trying to read. I'm trying to exercise regularly. all those sort of things. We just do what we can and be positive.
Yeah, man, that's great. Do you are you doing any sort of online lessons and things like that? Have you got students that you're teaching online or not?
No, I don't really. I give people occasional lessons, but I don't actually, when they request them. But I don't actually teach regularly anybody. So
Okay.
I sort of went through the thing of like saying, oh well, maybe I'll just reach out to some people who have got in touch, and I've got a bit of some people have asked for lessons and I haven't had time to do it. So I thought I'll just get in touch and do it now. They probably won't have any money, so I'll just teach them for free. And then you sort of get into the thing of, well, then some people are trying to make money from teaching. Am I taking money away from them? It's a bit of a difficult thing. So I've kind of stayed away from the teaching a bit. Everyone's trying to get through financially. So I just didn't want to go anywhere near the teaching thing. But it's people are having a lot of success of the online lesson thing. I think it's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I might get some lessons.
It is good. What have been some of the live sort of concerts? How have you guys gone about it? Would it be a solo thing, or have you done group ensembles live?
I haven't done anything live. I've only done recorded things.
Okay, all right.
Which is
one of the things that I've been trying to. When this whole thing started, I spoke to Leo Richardson about that quite a bit, to try and maybe do something, him and his quartet do a live thing. But the problem is the lag, with it doesn't matter how good your internet connection is, there are always dips, and there's latency, and there's all sorts of things like that. So that would be obviously a thing that would be a problem. I've been trying to think how to get about that, but I do like the fact that everybody's putting out some music, and everybody is contributing to the general well-being of everybody by putting out positive and creative things. And I think that's definitely the only way that we're going to get forward and get through this with our heads still firmly on our shoulders. Is if we can do something, positive and creative. It doesn't even have to be in your field, in whatever it is that you do. But if you've got something at the end of this fucking madness, right? We've all been stuck in our homes for coming up to 2 months now.
Yeah.
And if you can come out the other end with something that's tangible, either something you can feel and touch, or something that a new thing you've acquired rather.
Mm-hmm.
I think it will just not feel like wasted time, because I think that's probably one of the biggest and hardest things for everybody to get to grips with mentally, is that we're such a busy and productive society, and globally everybody's on the go all the time, bar the lazy people who don't do anything anyway. But the majority of people, we work for our money. We go in, we do a job, and we do that. Whether you're in banking or in music, or whether you're a teacher, a nursery practitioner, or whatever, we go out and we do things and we get things done, and then we come home and you're tired and you have dinner and you go to bed. And now all that sort of like up in the air, and people feel like, there's empty days and wasted time and things like that. And if we can, I just keep trying to hammer home all the time that if we do something productive and creative, then it's going to help our mental state so much better, because you're going to feel like, I've still achieved something. I've stared adversity in the face and I've triumphed. I went into something that's unprecedented, that's never happened before. We all went into this together, and I came out the other side, and I'm wiser. I speak another language. I fucking built a table, something, something that you can. So it's the only thing that I can say to people is, just keep doing what you're doing, but also try and do creative and positive things, and trying to help other people out, and don't be so, hateful. There's a there's a lot of anger flying about, unfortunately.
There really is. I mean, also everyone's dealing with that in their own different way. But sort of one of the things there's a lot of at these times there's lots of memes. There's lots of people with different opinions about about the times, what people should be doing. And one of the things sort of similar to what you were saying is about one thing. When this first started, I definitely put a lot of pressure on myself to do that. And then I interpreted it in my way, which was after sort of putting a bit too much pressure on myself, as I'm going to do those little creative things just a little bit each day, and make sure I'm not just doing that, I'm doing something for health. And then in a sort of healthy way, I'm listening to my head and my body. My body's like, okay, you need to be more mobile. Okay, my shin's sore from too much jump rope, I've got to do less of that, and just listen to my head and my heart, what I do need to do. And but like you say, always trying to actually achieve, I've got practice. I was speaking to a bunch of friends about there's things I wanted to practice for years, and now I'm going, well, I'm going to do that now. I want to check out this chord change on this tune. Every time I get to this tune, I was like, what about if I try this? And there's a lot that we can do, in this time to stay positive.
I agree with you 100%. Where you say, we should also not put too much pressure on ourselves and try and achieve everything in one day. Like you said, a little bit at a time. And this is almost a blessing, because whenever have the world stopped for everyone? And now we have time to do all those things that we wanted to do and pursue these things. And if we do a little bit of each thing every day, at the end of it, it's, we're going to come out. And I think it's just important to keep a positive vibe and try and keep people positive and inspire to do good and great things, and to to have a compassion with everybody and understand that you have an opinion, yes, and that's yours, and other people have theirs. So be mindful of the fact that other people have other opinions and they believe them as strongly as you do, but not be so angry, because I see a lot of anger flying about on social media, which I also definitely limit myself to, because it can become a septic sort of situation.
It definitely can.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
But I'm going to send you, would you mind if I'm going to share your social media and stuff like that so people can get in touch? If you don't mind, you can just send me what you want to share afterwards, and I'll put it in the description.
Sure.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure. Right, there we have it. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I have. I'll be sharing Graeme's social media as well I do mine, so you guys can catch up with us, see what we get up during this time. As always, like, share, subscribe, get the word out there. Keep it sound.